I recall how Papa's breathing wheezed, shallow and harsh, every evening that he returned from work. The once spotless denim shirt and crispy dark blue pants that Mama had pressed so meticulously that morning came home wrinkled, the knees crusted with grime, the shirt weeping rings of sweat. But he sported a hat, as usual, no matter what the weather. My favorite was the light blue skipper with a yellow band stained from Chicago summer sweat. Although back from her own job barely an hour before, Mama always greeted him at the door. Her eyes were moist with love and concern. I remember her wailing tears as she told us about the red in Papa's eyes, the veins bulging in his head, how he grew thin and old, working himself into the grave. I remembered Papa, but now I pictured Walter Lee, my brother. Over 100 people turned out for Walter Lee's funeral in the fall of 1996. Our Clybourne Park house wasn't nearly enough to hold everybody, so Mr. Yeager, Walter Lee's neighbor and partner, flung open the wide picket fence separating the two properties and welcomed our guests into his own yard. The Yeagers had moved to Clybourne around the same time as my family. They were fleeing the South Side as well, beating back their own fears since Jewish families elicited a wrath similar to what Black families faced, moving to all-white Christian neighborhoods. 15 years later, through friendship, sweat, and savings, the two families opened the first Y&Y dry cleaners. Mama lived long enough to see that first store, and her heart swelled with a love and pride that I had never seen before. Her faith in Walter Lee had been rewarded. In the following years, they added 2 more stores and hung signs lettered Younger and Yeager, or Yeager and Younger, depending on the neighborhood. Owning a home and a business, that proved to be the route towards lifting many minorities out of poverty. I had to acknowledge that Walter Lee had it half right 40 years before. He just had the wrong business because a liquor store would never get past Mama, and very wrong partners. Aunties and cousins from my sister-in-law Ruth's very large side of the family dutifully prepared and served the repast with their own hands. They ladled out steaming hot bowls of pig's feet soup to counter the brisk fall temperatures. Knowing only a smattering about Jewish tradition, I wondered about Mrs. Yeager exposing her kitchen counters to the pig trotters. "Don't worry, dear," she assured me, slicing up a piece of the delicacy for herself. "We go to synagogue on the high holy days, but we don't keep kosher otherwise." When Ruth brought the phone to me, whispering, "It's Hasagai," I wasn't surprised. Even though I had left him and Nigeria halfway through the rigorous 6-year medical program, Hasagai and I had remained friends. I had been so taken with Hasagai. God, with his intelligence and his romance and his passion and the romance of Africa. Oh my goodness. I didn't know what was left for me in the city anyway. What was left for me in Chicago? Mama had made Walter Lee head of the household, and he strongly suggested that I put off medical school and work. No, sorry. I left Chicago. I fled. But while in Lagos, I discovered that as radical as he was in his politics, when it came to our relationship, Asagai was a decided patriarch. Although my school hours were grueling and supplemented by part-time work in AIDS and malaria clinics, Asagai still expected that my primary job was supporting his political career. My encroaching depression and nearly falling prey to respiratory illness myself signaled that it was time for me to go. Asagai had multiple ladies and a divorce since then, but somehow our friendship held up. How are you keeping, Alaya? Asagai was especially pleased that I had adopted Alaya B. Younger as my author/journalist name. I'm good, but you know my brother needed me. And you were born to help people. Medicine was always my first passion, but Mama had still chided me on flitting from one thing to another. Back then, she and Ruth created this comedy routine, making fun of my acting, my photography, my horseback riding lessons. But my writing escaped their comedic barbs. I mean, the only things required were a stub of a pencil and a piece of paper. That's not expensive. But my thoughts, my ideas, desires, my fears, once written, they were inscribed in my soul forever. During my final year in college, I had studied the Great Migration of the early 1900s, when Black families from the South traveled north and to the Midwest in cities like New York, Detroit, Chicago. Mama and Papa were part of that migration. I wrote an essay about our family, how Mama had revealed we'd come from 5 generations of slaves and sharecroppers, all the years in the deteriorating slums of the South Side, our move to the all-white Clybourne Park, Asagai's reminder that ours was a world where our dreams, good or bad, depended on the death of a man, my papa. I sent my piece to the Chicago Defender, the largest Black newspaper in the Midwest, and they published it. And even though the distributors in the South refused to carry the newspaper, my work was still seen, thanks to an underground network of Pullman porters who traveled south with copies of the Defender. The newspapers were then circulated hand to hand and read in local restaurants and barbershops, giving hundreds of thousands of Black people access to the newspaper. When I returned to Chicago from Nigeria, I did complete medical school and my residency. But I also took a small job at the Defender, starting out answering letters to Southern readers. I was truly helping people, and I had found another passion. Mama thought this might keep me here, might make me stay put, but I still wanted more. I fled once again to New York City in the late 70s and joined the underground newspaper, The Village Voice. As a doctor turned writer, I reported on AIDS and medicine for the paper. And although that paper was considered by many to be run by white radicals, they encouraged me to be as Black as I wanted to be in my writing. One of my pieces even reached the Chicago Defender, and Walter Lee reached out to me. But when he suggested that my leaving Chicago again may have been responsible for Mama's deteriorating health, so you stayed, Walter Lee. You stayed, and I moved on. Does that make you better than me? You were man of the house, and even though you took everything, Mama still gave you everything back. And I slammed the phone down in fury, in grief, in guilt. 40 years. It's been 40 years since Walter Lee was swindled out of Papa's insurance money. After I moved to New York, Walter Lee and I saw each other only when Mama finally passed. So when I received his latest phone call, I was pretty shocked. I have pancreatic cancer, my brother informed me in a matter-of-fact tone. It's past the operable stage. I may have 3 to 6 months, but I can't drag Ruthie through this. Brother wanted my help. I taught you to love him, Mama had said. In Nigeria, unless the person was suffering from a communicable disease, I saw most terminal patients live out their final days peacefully, at home, with family. And that's what my brother wanted me to help him do. But that rage had consumed me for so long. Then again, Mama's voice. There is always something left to love. I no longer enjoyed privileges at Chicago hospitals, but still had contacts among the healthcare community there. I was surprised at how easy it was to procure what I needed. During the hospice rotation of my internship, we learned that when the body is freed from pain, it will just let go on its own. One night, Walter turned his head away from me and pursed his lips closed. But we had discussed this, and he had made me promise to do what he needed. So I waited until he turned back to me, and then I dripped 2 drops, as I had done the 3 days before. I don't believe that I killed Walter Lee with that microdosing of morphine. I want to believe that I helped him realize the dignity that can come with death. I tried so hard to shut the door on the old hurts, on the ancient anger. If I didn't, how could I ever be there when my brother needed me? We would not have been able to grieve together and finally even laugh together again. I would never have heard him cry out in fitful sleep, "I'm sorry, forgive me." And I would not have had the chance to whisper back, "You were right about some things, Walter Lee, and I forgive you." I think I do. I hope I forgive him.